Ben Woodruff here with another falconry video. Today's video I'm going to be talking about owls. And that brings up a lot of controversy and different thoughts and a lot of different people for a lot of different reasons from all over the world. But when I made this channel, originally I didn't expect to be doing weekly videos. But now that I've started and it's building some traction around the world, you know, a lot of falconers and a lot of wildlife experts around the world have a very narrow but deep area of expertise. They're very good at training goshawks, or they have a lot of experience with peregrine falcons, or something specific, or they're a seasoned wildlife rehabilitator, or they're a presenter at a wildlife sanctuary and they have experience in teaching and educating the public. Most people kind of have an area. I've been working with birds of prey since I was a kid for decades, and in many different capacities, in falconry and wildlife education and wildlife rehab and biology. And because of that, I have a broader range of experience than most people. Now, I'm not saying that at all to try to toot my own horn and be like, look at me. I'm saying it because I want to share that information. I had cardiac arrest and 3 strokes just a few months ago. I died, came back from the dead. I'm back here, and I'm like, you know what? I realize I'm not going to be around forever, and I want to share some of this expertise. I want to pass on some of this information so that it can be helpful, so that people can have access to it. And most people do not work with owls. I've worked with a lot of owls and have a wide range of experience in that, and I thought, you know what? This might be a good video, but it's a big topic, and so I've held off doing this because talking about a bunch of different owls and specifics, that's going to be a very long video. And this is going to be a very long video. But I did a video a few weeks ago, and it went into, I was just going through species by species, which I recommend a male or a female to work with. And people really liked it. I'm like, this video is over an hour long. But people said they enjoyed it, and so I'm going to go ahead and plow through this and do a video on owls. Now, if you're new to my channel, I have ADD. I wander around quite a bit, but I'll try to keep on track. I don't script these videos. I just kind of share my thoughts and my knowledge. So these are my notes for this. I just have a list of the different owls. So I think there's about 23 owls that I'm going to go and I'm going to give you my thoughts on working with them. And there'll be other species in addition to those that I'll talk about. But it's going to be kind of a fun thing to go through and talk about all these different species. Now, one thing I have to say on these long form videos, these take a lot of work to make. It's kind of a pain, so hopefully you enjoy this video. I intentionally make sure that I don't monetize in the middle of the video because it's really obnoxious to have all these interruptions all through the video. But again, I don't make squat off of these videos. I don't make hardly anything. I just have barely enough to get the monthly editing software subscription. So if you could hit subscribe to the channel, if you like this video, if you enjoy it, if you could hit subscribe, that very much would help me out. But let's jump into this. Let's talk about owls. Owls are amazing animals, and they're nothing like you would think. If you haven't worked with them before, first of all, they look like these big old round, big old pumpkins, right? No, they have a neck and a head that looks no different than a hawk underneath all those feathers. They just have poofy neck feathers. They look like they have dumpy little legs, most of them. Nope, they have long, lurpy, gangly legs underneath everything. But you don't normally see it because they have such long, poofy feathers. So learning about an owl from a book or even a video like I'm sharing with this, it doesn't give you all the in-depth. There's nothing better than hands-on experience. But I want to share hands-on experience because the book work I did as a kid and a teenager growing up and learning, boy, then when I held these birds in hand, it's like, this is a totally different bird. So I want to give some insights, and I have to say, to start off with, owls are weird. Their thinking is weird. They don't train like a normal bird of prey. Some of them train no different than a hawk, and it's cut and dry and super easy. And then another individual of the same species, it's just like food isn't a motivation, socialization isn't a motivation. They're just kind of weird and loopy in the head. That's just how owls can be. So I'm going to be giving recommendations and thoughts on a wide range of species, but please be aware this is not doctrine, this is experience. And every owl is an individual. Every owl has its own mind, its own life experience, and it's going to behave differently than other animals. So just be aware of that these things I'm saying, they are real experiences, but again, it's more about you have to have the hands-on experience as well. So I'm just sharing my experiences with you. We're going to start off with a very famous owl, the snowy owl. Snowy owls are large, and they're a member of the eagle owl family or the bubo family. The bubo family tree, I'm not going to go through every member, but I'm going to go through ones that are commonly used in falconry or wildlife education. Bubo owls are different than all the other owls in that they have a much more powerful talons and a grip, and their beak is good at breaking off and tearing off pieces of meat and bone. Most owls are not that way. Most owls, whether large or small, would prefer to swallow their prey whole. Owls do not have a crop like other birds do. And so when they swallow, it goes straight down to their stomach. And most owls, they would like to eat a rodent or an insect or whatever they get. They'd like to just swallow it down whole. Well, these bigger owls, these first several that I'm talking about, including the first one, the snowy owl, these are all owls with tremendous bite force and the ability to tear off pieces of meat and bone, which allows them to hunt much larger prey. So the snowy owl is a very large, very powerful member of the eagle owl family. Snowy owls are circumpolar. They live in the northern part of the northern hemisphere. They are very fluffy, obviously, because they're Arctic. They're tundra birds, and most of where they live, there aren't even any trees. So you're perching on the ground or on a little knoll, a little hill. Now that you're perching on the snow, that's not good. So unlike any other owl, snowy owls are the only owls who have feathers on the bottom of the feet, on the pads of their feet. It's very unusual. Most owls are feathered on top of their toes, but not the bottom, because the bottom has those scales that they can use to grip and better hold on to prey that's wiggling around. Not snowy owls. They have these big old huge poofy. And that works for them, helps keep them warm. Snowy owls can either be any snowy owl I've ever worked with or handled has been great, but I've also heard horror stories from other people, ones that just refuse to perch. You have them out weathering, and you got a perch set up for them, and you put their leash on the perch, and boom, they just want to perch on the ground. Well, that's fine and good. That's what they do in the wild. They perch on the ground, but they still perch in trees too when they migrate further south. But some snowy owls in captivity just want to perch on the ground. One rule too, I gotta say this. I should have said this early on. Any owl, if you are intending to get an owl of any kind, my recommendation to you is to get an imprint, get a baby, raise it from a baby, whether it's captive bred or if you have permission to get them from the wild, raise a baby. That helps their mind, because an owl's mind is not as cut and dry as other raptors. So you're going to have the most success doing that. Now, that being said, there's owls that, I've caught from the wild, and, once I put the jesses on, they're just sitting on the fist like there's no problem. They're not jumping around or baiting at all. So, but that's not the same as training them to fly to you or eat food off of your fist. So that can be kind of tricky. So any owl you get, my recommendation first and foremost is to get a baby. If you can't, that doesn't mean you can't necessarily work with them. Like I said, most owls can be trained to do basic fist work and be good for educational programs. Like maybe you have an injured owl that comes in and it needs a permanent home. Okay, well, you might be able to train it really well to use to be an ambassador for the species, but it might not be a very good bird for anything beyond that. And that's okay. This is just talking about owls in general. So snowy owls, they're beautiful, they're powerful, they're impressive. It's the Harry Potter owl. Everybody ever sees one is like, oh, that's the owl that Harry Potter had in the Harry Potter books and the Harry Potter movies. So they're beautiful to work with. They're very inspiring. But heat is also a consideration. You have to keep them cold because they're tundra birds, they're Arctic birds. And so if you are getting one for any reason or any way, make sure that the temperatures that you have are a major consideration and make sure that they stay cool enough. Other than that, wonderful birds to work with, very impressive, much bigger than you would think. Most people kind of view them, if you've worked with birds, you're like, oh, it's probably about the size of a great horned owl. Nope, they're a lot bigger. They're huge. The next owl is the Eurasian eagle owl. Eurasian eagle owls are one of my absolute favorite owls. They're like a great horned owl on steroids. They are enormous. They're one of the largest owls on Earth, and they're powerful. And they're the owl that you think of when all those old fairy tales, when the children are lost in the woods and they see the great owl in the tree. Ooh, and a lot of those old German fairy tales and stuff. That's the owl they're talking about, is a Eurasian eagle owl. These things are huge. They hunt rabbits and polecats and all kinds of things, but they will even hunt roe deer. They are capable of killing roe deer, which is a small species of deer that you have over there in Europe and Asia. So that's a powerful owl. They can't fly away with it. They're not going to, carry away a deer, but they can knock them over and crunch them up till they stop wiggling. So that's a very powerful owl. I love to work with these. Training them is hit and miss. Half of them that I've worked with have just trained up, raised from babies, captive bred. Half of them have trained up super easy, and they'll train up, they'll fly to the fist, and half of them won't. Half of them are just kind of like, oh, I don't know what's going on. I've generally seen the males train up better for being able to fly or hunt or doing anything like that than the females. The females are a little more hesitant, is what I've seen in my personal experience. But with one exception, every Eurasian eagle owl I've had has been basically a joy to work with. One of them I got as a breeder, and she is the biggest eagle owl I've ever seen in my life. She was so powerful, I had her on a perch made out of 2x4s, and she just got mad. She looked at me, started hissing, and she started crunching, and she started shattering the 2x4 of the piece of wood with her talons, just crunching, and it was shattering it. It was amazing. So they're very impressive, very powerful, and a very good bird to use in public settings. I love them. I think they're great to work with, and they're great to teach with. And again, these are one of the owls that has had success being used as a hunting bird, as a falconry bird. So highly recommend them. The next version, or not the next version, the next species is really just a subspecies, and that's the Siberian eagle owl, which is a Eurasian eagle owl that lives so far north that it has started to turn white. It's starting to cross over into the range of a snowy owl, and therefore being whiter is the name of the game. These they train just as well as a regular Eurasian eagle owl. And some people who I've talked to here in the States who have them have said they train even better. So again, a joy to work with. Some of them are just about pure white. But again, they have the big old, feather crests that look like horns. Incredible birds, incredible to work with. And if you hunted with one, they'd be incredible to hunt with as well. But again, this is a bird that's a lot of bird. This is not a good beginner's bird, not because of how hard it is to train, but because with both Eurasian eagle owls and Siberian eagle owls, both of these, this is a lot of bird. It's a heavy bird. It's a strong bird. It's a powerful bird. When it baits and gets back up, it's not as big as like a golden eagle, but it's certainly as big as some of the smaller eagles, probably about the size of a Bonelli's eagle, maybe even bigger. A big female eagle owl is probably bigger than a Bonelli's eagle. And so with that in mind, this is not a good first owl to work with. But again, if you've worked with a smaller owl, work your way up, this is a great owl to work with. The next owl is a Verreaux eagle owl. It's also sometimes called the pink-eyed owl or the milky-eyed owl. This is, again, a member of that eagle owl family, which is the bubo family, okay? That lineage. This, in my mind, is the furthest branch outward. Most every other member of this lineage, if you look at them, and I'm only going to list a few of them here in this video, but if you look at them, you're like, oh yeah, I can see they're related. These ones are weird. They diverged off much earlier from the rest of the bubo owls. These, they have very faint, subtle markings on their wings and on their feathers. They don't have the thick bars that you have with the other members of this family. Now, these owls are very good to work with. Everybody I know who's ever flown one or worked with one has not done so in a falconry capacity. They have all done it in the capacity of wildlife education. But both for training to fly to the fist or fly to a lure or just fist work around a big crowd, these owls have been very good to work with. They're impressive, they're beautiful, they're huge, they're pretty mellow. And in the States, they're pretty hard to get. I know in other countries, the captive bred ones are a little easier to get, but here they're pretty tricky to come by. But those who get the chance to work with them sing their praises and say they're way easier to work with than other members of the eagle owl family like great horns and snowy owls and Eurasian eagle owls and Siberian eagle owls, all those. They say they're way better and much smarter and easier to work with. Now, they have a very different life because they're in Africa where it gets quite hot. Most eagle owls are in colder climes. So they've evolved accordingly, and that's why they have those pink eyes. They basically have bald eyelids. There's so much feather covering around the face of owls that helps funnel sound to their ears, that you have so much insulation that it's not good for the eyes, especially in the heat of a hot African summer night. And so good to have those basically bare eyelids that when they cover up you can see, and that's why they look like they have pink eyes. The next owl is a great horned owl. This is kind of the king of North America, queen of the night, if you will. Great horned owls are a member of the eagle owl family, and they show it. Now, they're not as big as the Eurasian eagle owl or any of the other owls I've mentioned so far, but they make up for it in their power and their aggression. They will tackle all kinds of larger prey. They'll hunt, mice and rats and things like that, but they'll hunt rabbits and they'll hunt foxes. They'll hunt skunks regularly. They have no sense of smell, so if you're going to hunt a skunk, you're not thinking anything of it. You're like, this little guy's walking around slow. Nobody's eating him. I'm just going to catch him. So that's what they do. I have had that happen before. I have had one of my great horned owls catch a skunk while I was out hunting rabbits at night. Not a good experience, but it is what it is. So great horned owls live all over the United States. They're in Canada, and they range down southward into Mexico. Great horned owls are powerful in their grip. They're powerful in their bite. And they know they are the top owl in the New World. They know it. They know nothing's going to mess with them. Most every other owl, other than a barred owl, because barred owls are just yucky, but other than barred owls, basically every other owl in the United States is pretty quiet. During mating season, they'll do a little bit. They might do a little whistle or a little trill because every other owl in the United States is afraid of great horned owls. You make a loud sound, great horned owl's going to find you and come and kill you and eat you. Great horned owls they nest very early. Right now, it's November, and they're already pairing up in Utah. They'll be on eggs usually by January. They don't build their own nest. No owl does. And so a great horned owl will just say, hey, I'm just going to take over another bird's nest. Hey, here's a hawk nest. Oh, I'll just take it over. And then when the hawk comes back, oh, it's time to start a family. Oh, no. You're not going to fight with an owl. So they leave. And that's how great horned owls get their nest. Now, they'll nest in hollow trees and other places too. But again, I'm getting off track here. I want to talk about what they're like to work with. Great horned owls are a joy to work with for basic handling. Again, this is one of the owls that I've trapped from the wild and been able to have sitting on the fist immediately with no problem, no reaction, no response. They're just like, okay, this is what we're doing now. That's pretty neat. I've never had a great horned owl that wasn't a joy to work with on the fist. That being said, raising baby owls, half of my great horns have been great as far as being trained to fly, free fly, hunt, and the other half acted as dumb as a rock in their behavior. Their behavior made sense to them, but it didn't translate to human interaction. And that's just how it is. I had one of them that we were out hunting, and it saw a rabbit, and it went and it caught a boot, and it wouldn't let go. So I had to bring the whole boot home. And same thing, it would go after rabbits, and if it grabbed a section of bunch grass that the rabbit was in and the rabbit ran out, it's like, hey, I've got something in my fist, so I'm not going to let go at all, and I just have to take it home, and eventually it would let go of the grass at home. So you can run into things like that with the great horned owl, but a great horned owl is a beautiful bird. The eastern ones have a lot more color on their face and their body. Out here in the west, they're a bit more pale, and if you go north, once you get up to like your northern states in Canada, they same just like the Siberian eagle owl is a Eurasian eagle owl that's so far north that it's almost white. There are great horned owls that are almost completely white as well because they're that far north. So you just kind of adapt to your environment. Great horned owls, again, it's a very impressive owl. If you're trying to teach people, a great horned owl is a great bird to teach with because they usually have really good fist manners. They're usually good around crowds. You rock them a little, you can get them to open up their wings. They're great to work with. So if you're actually going to try to do falconry with an owl, a great horned owl is a good choice. And if you're going to use an education bird, a great horned owl is an amazing choice. The next owl is the great gray owl. Now, I have not had the chance to train one of these, and I would kill to do so. I would love to work one of these so much. Now, the great gray owl is nuts because its head looks to be about the size of a dinner plate. But its actual head, meaning its skull, its actual skeletal structure, is smaller than a great horned owl. So if you're looking at a great horned owl having a head looking about this big, and a great gray owl, a female, is a facial disc that big, but yet the head is actually smaller. Well, how do you know what I'm talking about? Anytime you look at an owl, you just got to look at the tip of the beak and the eyeballs. The outer edge of the eyeballs is the outer edge of the head. Anything past the eyeballs is feather. And it's a facial disc designed to help funnel sound to the actual ears, which are down here. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier. With owls, most owls, one ear opening is pointed higher, one ear is pointed lower. That gives them three-dimensional hearing. This is why owls are always like bobbing around. They're three-dimensionally triangulating sound. But those feathers on the facial disc of a great gray owl are huge. So again, the eyeballs are the end of the head. Draw a triangle from the outer edge of the eyeballs to the tip of the beak. That's the size of the actual skull. Everything else is feathers. But in the case of a great gray owl, they like to pounce on things. Normally it's voles, gophers, moles, voles, little mice, but mostly voles that are under the snow. So you have to have hearing so good that you can hear through the snow, and they'll just listen and triangulate, and they'll silently fly, because most owls are silent. They'll silently fly and punch through. Now, the wingspan of a great gray owl is enormous, and as such, if you're like a biologist and you're reading the books on the size, you're like, oh, this is one of the biggest owls in the world. Yeah, by wingspan, not by weight. These guys are not all that big. They're a bunch of fluff. And from here on out, all the rest of the mini owls I'm talking about in this video, including this one, are a bunch of fluff. And the feathers are lying to you. So now that I gotta point this out too. When we're talking about owls, a lot of people will see owls at night. They see them unexpectedly. The owl is surprised, so the owl stretches out its legs, poofs out its feathers, poofs out its wings, and it looks enormous. And because you are alarmed by this, you remember it is much larger than it is. But then you see a trained owl, and the trained owl is squatting down in its normal posture, and its legs that are literally squatting are covered up by its tummy feathers. And so what you end up with is you see that owl, and you're like, oh, that owl was little. The one I saw in the wild was huge. No. The one you saw in the wild was scared. It was startled, and so it stretched out to its full height and poofed out its body feathers in every direction to look enormous. Great grays are no exception. Great grays are incredible birds. They're amazing. They're some of the most highly adapted and specialized of owls, but they're not, even though they're big, they're not as big as you think, and they're actually smaller than a great horned owl. Great horned owls just have shorter feathers everywhere, shorter wing feathers, shorter tail feathers, shorter body feathers, shorter head feathers, and so a great horned owl looks smaller than a great gray, but a great gray is actually much smaller than a great horned owl. The next owl is another really cool species and a very, very odd owl, and that is the northern hawk owl. Now, it's called a northern hawk owl because it's kind of the size and really sort of the shape of a hawk. Its facial disc is much smaller, which means it does not rely on it doesn't rely on sound as much as sight for its hunting. Whereas the great gray is all about, I gotta hear through the snow. Northern hawk owl is like, no, I'm just gonna see things. Because you gotta understand, northern hawk owls live so far north that for a lot of them, half of the year the sun never sets. So they're largely a daytime owl. And anytime, if you have an owl that is mostly diurnal instead of nocturnal, it is much better to work with for training and for falconry across the board. So there are falconers in Ontario who have flown these successfully in falconry. They have been widely used in education. They train easily. But there's nothing else like them. Look at the tail. The tail is enormous. Owls, for their body size, all owls have comparatively short tails, and some of them have downright dinky tails. Not the northern hawk owl. The northern hawk owl has a ridiculously long, well-defined tail that is good for maneuverability. So they will hunt birds, they will hunt rodents, but northern hawk owls, where did they come from? Nothing else looks like. You go through all your list of all your owls, like, what looks like them? Well, genetic studies have shown that northern hawk owls are actually the king of the pygmy owls. That's right. Pygmy owls are widespread around the world. There's 29 different species of pygmy owls, and we're going to go into a few of them in this video. But if you look at the patterns on the wings, if you look at the facial disc, if you look at the stripes on the tail, you're starting to see, oh, yeah. So they're a sister lineage to pygmy owls that branched off a long time ago and then got big and did their thing. It's kind of amazing to think that you could have a species do something like that. But the northern hawk owls, highly recommend working with them. Comparatively easy to train. Same rule, any owl, you're going to have better luck if you're training it from a baby. But across the board, northern hawk owls all around the world, whether it's an old world northern hawk owl or a new world northern hawk owl, I highly recommend working with them, training them, flying them, and even using them in falconry. The next owl is the long-eared owl. Long-eared owls, again, anytime you have anything that has the term ear, these things on owls that have them are not ears, but people describe them, oh, it looks like ears, so we're going to call it the long-eared owl. Long-eared owls look like a great horned owl. And if you're unfamiliar with them, you might easily get them wrong. You might see a long-eared owl and be like, oh, it's a great horned owl. They have kind of similar patterning, kind of similar colors, and, the same, the tufts on top of their head. They do, and I guess, they live old world and new world. And so the old world ones, probably look a bit like a little version of a Eurasian eagle owl. Now, that's convergent evolution. But that could also be a benefit because nobody wants to mess with an eagle owl. Nobody wants to mess with a great horned owl. So if you're seeing that, you might think, oh no, okay, I don't want to mess with this owl. It's a big owl. It's scary. We see the same thing with cats. Birds of prey typically will not mess with cats. Now, a house cat is nothing for a golden eagle, but they know, geez, cats, cougars, bobcats, that's what they're relating it to, we think. And so they just steer clear. And in a similar way, we think that other predators might not mess with a long-eared owl because they think it's a great horned owl or an eagle owl. They're not very big. They're very small. They have big poofy feathers. This is a very small owl. Not large at all. Dinky. They're great to work with. They're great to train. They're great for education, but they are much smaller than you would think. If you ever pick one up, you will not even believe how incredibly small they are underneath all those feathers. Big long legs that they squat, and so they can stretch out and stand tall. Now, this is a very successful species. It's very widespread, and they very much will key in on. Now they'll just be on their own or be as a pair, but they will also key in on any population boom. If there's a big population of voles or gophers or big pack rats or something, if you have a big population boom somewhere, they will key in on it and they will nest in loosely colonially in a big colony. They like to be in extremely dense wooded trees and forests, so dense that it's hard to get through. The kind of forest that a great horned owl does not want to fly through. So they like it super, super, super dense, and they will nest in groups. You could have as much as 20, 30, 40 pairs of long-eared owls nesting together. Now, that's happened to me twice in my life, where there was rodent population booms, the long-eared owls keyed in on it, and they nested in big old huge colonies. All the rest of my life, anytime I've ever come across a long-eared owl nest, it's been alone. So, again, they just kind of key in on those rodent populations. So, I do recommend this as a species to work with. They're not the brightest of owls, but they're not the most clueless of owls either. They're pretty good, and again, you raise them from baby. They're pretty good to train in on being able to fly to the fist and do some basic hunting, but they're not a good pursuit predator. They're not going to chase anything with a lot of gusto. Now, the next owl is the short-eared owl. The long-eared owl and the short-eared owl were both, for a long time, considered to be very closely related. And even though they're taxonomically related, of the clade that they are in, they are as far out as you can be. They're the two far ends to still be in the same clade. And they look kind of similar, but apparently they're branched off quite a long time ago. Short-eared owls are highly successful, and they have gone all over the world. Their skeleton is almost identical to a long-eared owl. Their coloration and everything, their way of life is different, but their skeleton is almost identical. So again, this is a very small owl underneath everything. It's got a big wingspan. Wingspan about, could be up to as big as a male red-tailed hawk. But they're very lightweight. This is an owl that is totally fine hunting in the daytime. In fact, usually it prefers it all around the world, anywhere it is. The only time I normally see them at night, honestly, is if there's some sort of nocturnal rodent population boom that they're trying to key in on, like kangaroo rats. If the kangaroo rats, okay, then the short-eared owls are coming out and they're all chasing and hunting them. Other than that, short-eared owls typically prefer the daytime. They fill an ecological role almost identical to northern harriers. And just like northern harriers, they hunt in a similar way. Both birds will just kind of, okay, I'm just gonna go fly along. I'm gonna scan, my head. And both short-eared owls have a diminished facial disc for an owl. That's not a very well-defined facial disc. And conversely, harriers do have a facial disc about the same as a short-eared owl. So these two compete, they fight, they're similar in weight, they're both extremely buoyant, and they're both extremely successful in how far they've ranged. Now, short-eared owls have ranged all over the world, even into the tropics. They have managed to colonize and survive and thrive in Hawaii, but people, for whatever reason, introduced barn owls into Hawaii, and so now the Hawaiian short-eared owls are kind of getting out competed by the barn owls. But they're also on the Galapagos Islands. There's a Galapagos short-eared owl. So this is a very successful species. It's just got the right size. It's just big enough to have some oomph, but just small enough that it's not as reliant on hefty prey bases. And it can migrate very easily because it's so buoyant, and it can just rock and rock and rock just like a harrier. They're very fun to work with. I have never trained one to hunt with, but I've worked with them in education capacities, and they trained up easily enough, just fine, to fly to the fist and to fly around. They're a good bird to teach with, and they're a very great bird to teach about ecology, because they are kind of the spirit of the grasslands and the prairies and the marshes. So it's good to use them in that capacity as teaching. So great bird to work with, very interesting bird. Unlike the long-eareds, which they're technically related to, short-eared owls do not nest colonially. They're very much kind of doing their own thing. But very interesting bird, very fun to work with. The next owl is the barn owl. Again, one of the most recognizable and most widespread owls on the planet. Barn owls do like to live in barns because barns offer protection from larger owls. They offer protection from the cold and the elements, and they're usually filled with rodents. But if there's no barns, barn owls usually nest in caves and rocky alcoves, and they'll nest wherever they have to. They will nest in hollow trees as well, big hollow tree. But barn owls are a branch completely unrelated to all the rest of the owls. All other owls, it's like you got all owls, and then you got your barn owls. So barn owls are, they're strange. They don't squat. They're standing up all the time. That's unusual. And there's other members of this family, like the grass owls, the bay owls, are all kind of closely related to these barn owls, and they have a different look. One of the odd things about them, most owls have some level of where if they're under certain light conditions, like if they're under a black light, they will have colors that are invisible to the human eyes, but which they can see. Most owls have that in some capacity. Barn owls do not at all, completely do not in any way, shape, or form. It's just straight up just their feathers. Barn owls are another bird that is way larger than they look. They're very lightweight. They're extremely buoyant. And they are generally considered to be the most silent of all the owls. Of any owl species on Earth, they are the most silent. Most owls are quite silent, but barn owls, absolutely, hands down, are the most silent. I have got them to hunt, I've had captive bred great horns that I've gotten to catch at night, kangaroo rats, and that's about it. Other than that, I've had them tackle. I've trained some to be able to tackle cottontails that didn't see them coming, but the second they grabbed the cottontail, it bucked them off. So not a very well-suited falconry bird, but a very good education bird. They're great for teaching. They're great for teaching about how sound. A lot of educational programs, I've done this as well. You'll use like a little clicker, like a metronome clicker, digital clicker, and you train them to come to that, and they'll find it. They'll seek it out and find it, just like it's a little rodent. So excellent bird to work with. Almost every part of the world has some species or subspecies of barn owl. And so it's a very relatable owl, good for people to see. One of the things is barn owls underneath, they're under their wings are very white, and it's a very reflective white. So I can't tell you how many times people have had a barn owl hunting rodents by the side of the road. They scare it up with their car, and it flies up in front of them, and they see the underwings flashing back, and all they see is white reflecting back at them. And people are like, "Oh, Ben, I saw a snowy owl the other night." I'm like, "No, you didn't." And they tell the story, and I'm like, "Well, you know, it's July in Utah. It's like 110 degrees. It wasn't a snowy owl. It was a barn owl. It was just reflecting." And they're like, "Oh, well, okay, I can see that." But if you look up a picture of a barn owl, you don't see that because all of their outer colors are all are all mottled and camouflage. But underneath, bright white and beautiful, really reflective. So barn owls, great to work with, great to teach with, great to train to fly. It's hard to get them to hunt anything. Like I said, I've just done it with kangaroo rats and had fun with that. They're fun to fly at night. I like to, when I have them, I usually take them down. There's a cemetery by my house, and I just go walking around. And it's so cool because I just let them go and, you know, call them, and they just follow me from tombstone to tombstone. And when you call them, all of a sudden from the darkness, boom, you suddenly have an owl on your fist. It's really fun. Kind of a cool place to do it at. The next owl is one of my favorites, and we do not have them in Utah. I've had a chance to work with them several times. I'd like to get another one. They're very common, and that is the barred owl. Now, it's kind of interesting. There's the government in America has authorized the killing of a ton of barred owls where they're overlapping in the range of the spotted owl, and I'll get to the spotted owls in a minute. So it's kind of sad that's the case. But barred owls are highly successful. Barred owls are medium size. They've got some power and some size behind them. They've got some legitimate grip. They've got some legitimate mass. Again, I said all the other owls are poofy. They're all poofy, but this one's got some mass to it. And I think, you know, it's like the third or fourth biggest in the United States by weight. So they're decent size. They've got some power to them. They're good hunters. They can be trained for falconry. They are great for education. They're one of the best owls to show. They train up really easily, and if you pull the feathers back on the facial disc, you can show them the back side of the eyeball. You can show people, because people don't realize, you know, they're like, "Oh yeah, this huge facial disc is not the owl. The owl is just right here." And you can just pull that facial disc back super easily and show it, and it's actually really good for teaching. Barred owls in the wild are really loud and obnoxious. They're extremely territorial and aggressive, not only of other owls coming into the territory, but also people. If you're near their nest, they're one of the few owls who will actively, regularly attack and hit you. So they have that attitude and that sassiness, and I think that translates well over to use in falconry. The equipment is just like any other owl. I didn't mention this. I will put a link in this video. Most owls have feathers on their legs, and they don't have scales underneath. And so jesses or anklets of any kind can cause abrasions. So I developed a system using fur-lined anklets inside and out. I will put a link in the video description to that video showing how to make these, and I use them on a lot of birds. Any bird that's baiting too much, I try these. They work great, and I definitely would use them on barred owls. But I can't praise barred owls enough. I think they're great in every way. I think they're great for education. I think they're great for falconry. I think they're great for teaching with. I think they're wonderful birds and really, really cool birds. Now, they are closely related to the spotted owl. The spotted owl is a little smaller, and not much smaller, but a little smaller. Spotted owls and barred owls are closely related, and they can even interbreed. We know for sure they have in the wild, but because they're closely related enough, that's kind of hard to tell from binoculars in a dense forest which one's which. They also have interbred in captivity. So they are that closely related, but the big debate here is that spotted owls, especially on the Pacific coast, are they were isolated from barred owls. But as climatic conditions have changed, it's been favorable for barred owls to come around over the top and make that connection. And now barred owls are starting to populate the Pacific Northwest of the United States. And that's causing problems because people say, well, hey, this is bad for the spotted owls. They're going to outcompete the spotted owls, and the spotted owls are going to go extinct. So I have mixed feelings on that. On the one hand, sure, let's preserve our species. But on the other hand, if this is nature's way of doing things, and you have barred owls and spotted owls interbreeding in some cases, well, that's extinction insurance. And that's how species move on. The world is always changing. And so maybe it's wrong for us to step in. Maybe we should. Maybe we shouldn't. That's not the point of this video. But I'm just bringing that up as a point. Now, spotted owls themselves, I haven't worked with them personally, but the spotted owls are they're a little more aloof in their behavior than barred owls. Barred owls are like, all right, hey, what are we doing here? We're gonna do some falconry, we're gonna do some wildlife education. Okay. Spotted owls are a little more aloof. They still glove train just fine, and they can still be trained to fly to the fish just fine, but they're a bit more aloof, and they're a bit more sketchy and more spooky in their behavior. But that's okay. Just giving you kind of the breakdown on how that works. Now, another spotted owl, some people classify this as a subspecies, some people say it's an entirely different species, is the Mexican spotted owl, which we do have here in Utah, where I live. Now, this is a very weird version of a spotted owl, because the area they live is desolate red rock country, big old huge, like all the national parks of Utah we have, like Bryce Canyon and Zion and Moab, Utah, Arches National Park, some of these amazing places with these big, desolate, super hot red rock formations. Spotted owls like it humid. Spotted owls like it dark and humid and shady. That's why they like the forests of the Pacific Northwest. So what are they doing here? Well, some of our canyons are so stinking deep that they have these microclimates that you just have water and humidity being trapped in these places. And in these steep canyons, a pair of Mexican spotted owls will just take up residence and nest and start a family. And it's beautiful. It's amazing. We have in the western United States, we have a lot of places like that where we have microbiomes where just in this little stretch, this is where things can live. And so that's where you go to find them. They're going to be there. And so that's the Mexican spotted owl. So Mexican spotted owls, not much has been done with them other than just biologists observing them in the wild. The expectation would be if anyone ever had one in any capacity, they'd probably be just fine for education. They'd probably be no different than a regular spotted owl, which again is kind of like a barred owl, but a bit more aloof. That's how one would expect them to be as far as their behavior and their handling. Now we got to talk about a couple of old world owls because we got a comparison. So we mentioned the barred owl and the spotted owl. Well, in the old world, you have the Ural owl and the Tawny owl. And these guys can all interbreed. They all seem very closely related. And they all seem like they fit the same role. The Ural owl fits the role of the spotted owl, and the Tawny owl fits the role of the spotted owl. So these owls, the Ural owl, again, it's the size of a barred owl, and it's a very northerly owl, and it likes it cold, but not as cold as a snowy owl. I've talked to a lot of friends in Russia who have worked with them and say they're an absolute delight to work with. Again, they're wonderful for education. They can be trained easily to fly to the fist. Again, raise them from a baby, train them to fly to the fist. They do good. But if you have one that is coming in as an old breeder or an injured bird coming in that needs a permanent home, they're still going to train up just fine on the fist. They're good to work with. They're easy to work with. And again, it's a substantial enough owl, just like a barred owl, that you've got some substance there. So it's a good bird to teach with. I bring this up because soon we're going to be getting to some really tiny owls. And they're so tiny that they're not good for programs unless you're just showing a couple of people. And that can be a factor. So I think a Ural owl is a great owl to work with. I think they're very iconic. There's a lot of artwork, medieval artwork of Ural owls. So you always have this artwork of the Eurasian eagle owl and the Ural owl. You see both of these a lot in art. The next owl is the Tawny owl. The tawny owl, again, in Europe and Asia, fills a similar role to the spotted owl here in North America. The tawny owl has a lot of overlap with humanity. It's the owl that most people will have seen or heard. And because it's going right into towns and cities, it's quite an accessible owl. As such, this is an owl that has had some use in falconry, and it has proven itself to be able to do some basic falconry and basic hunting for people, and it's widely used in education. It's also a commonly captive bred owl, and it is an owl that is a very good owl to work with. So I have not worked with tawny owls personally. I included them in this video because, again, you got the barred owls and the spotted owls. Well, you've also got the Ural owls and the tawny owls. And again, there's all those four are closely related, and they fill similar roles just on the other sides of the world. So I had to put the tawny owl in here because I thought you had to have it in there for completion. Okay, now we are starting to get into some of the smaller owls. The next owl is the Boreal owl. Boreal owls are kind of a circumpolar bird, live on both sides of the globe, up in the north. They like it cold, and they're very recognizable as an adult, but also as a juvenile. As a juvenile, they're very dark and melanistic, and then that completely changes as an adult. Boreal owls are willing to hunt birds. They hunt a lot of rodents, and in the summertime, they'll hunt insects as well. But these are one of these owls that are willing to hunt birds and are willing to be more active in their pursuit. So even though they're very small, they have that capacity in falconry. They're great to work with in wildlife education for an ambassador for their species, and they can train up really well even if they weren't raised from a baby. This is one of the few owls that can be trained even if raised up, even if not raised from a baby. Cool species, little, and they gave rise to the next species, which is the saw-whet owl. Saw-whet owls are strictly a New World version. They came from boreal owls. They can crossbreed with boreal owls, but usually their ranges don't entirely overlap. Usually one will kind of pick an area versus over the other. Saw-whet owls, they look like Muppets. They look like stuffed animals. They're so cute. They look like a toy. It's hard to believe that they could ever kill anything, but believe me, they can. This is another fast, zippy little bird. They can train easily. This is another bird that can be trained. They're smart enough. You can train one that has come from the wild, even as a bird that comes from the wild that's not raised from a baby. You can still train them up. Saw-whet owls, they're so little. Please, if you're going to do any of these small owls, watch my video about the owl jesses, because it's absolutely crucial. If you're going to have these birds, you got to take such good care of the gentle, delicate feathers you have on their legs. And the video I have shows the way to do that in a way that is healthy for the bird and healthy for you, and that you can have a good time with them. So saw-whets are really kind of a neat bird. They've that branch, that lineage has given rise to a few others. So if you go further down south, down into Central America, it has given rise also to the unspotted saw-whet owl, which is just kind of like less pigmented saw-whet owl. It's just kind of got some yellows and oranges on its chest, but other than that, it's got less stripes because it's no longer in a hardwood forest, so it's trying to blend in more with like greens and yellows instead of the bark of a pine tree. So very different. But both of these, the boreal owl, the saw-whet owl, and the unspotted saw-whet owl, all of these very closely related, and all of them can be trained very easily and are great to work with. They're big enough, even though they're little, they're big enough to be a good bird to use for programs, but small enough to be absolutely adorable and to really kind of help people have an appreciation for wildlife. The next bird is the northern pygmy owl. The northern pygmy owl is the biggest surprise because they're tiny. And any owl that's small, you would think, is not going to be very good for falconry. These things are incredible. These birds hunt tons and tons and tons of birds. They specialize in hunting other birds much larger than them. They're fast. They're agile, they're nimble, they have a long tail for their size, and they are zippy. They target. It's not an exception to the rule. In nature, you're always going to have exceptions to the rule. The rule with these is that they're mostly primarily hunting little songbirds. So these can be trained very easily. You raise them up from young, you can train them to hunt other birds. You can train them to hunt sparrows or starlings, things like that. They're fast, again, they're flashy, they're easy to train, they're easy to work with, and they're smart. They're mostly diurnal. Remember the rule, the more an owl is diurnal, usually the more trainable it is, and the more it will accommodate itself to the type of thinking that falconry lends itself to. The more that it is nocturnal, the harder, the trickier it is to train. So northern pygmy owls are absolutely incredible. They're such neat birds. The next owl is the Ferruginous pygmy owl, which is just a further south version. But I know people who watch this channel who have worked with them, so shout out to them. That again, this is a bird that can be trained and is easy to work with. The Ferruginous pygmy owl, same thing. I think any pygmy owl you work with is going to be a joy, including the northern hawk owl, which is just basically a giant pygmy owl. The next owl is the western screech owl. Western screech owls do not screech. The sound they make is like shit like that. It's like a little cooing of a dove. So I don't know who named them a screech owl. They don't screech. Screech owls can be trained. Same thing with any owl. If you get them young, you can train them to hunt. If you get them as an adult, you can train them to do fist work and be good for educational shows. But other than that, they usually don't fly to the fist well. Screech owls, western screech owls, I've worked with a lot of them in a lot of capacities. I love them. They're great. They just look like a little gray potato. And they're fun. They're fun to teach. Again, it looks like a stuffed animal, but they're big enough to still use for programs, to actually have an impact for people, where some of these smaller owls are not. The next owl is the eastern screech owl. Eastern screech owls are kind of weird. Western screech owls are gray. Eastern screech owls, some of them are gray, and some of them are a reddish-orange, kind of a rusty color, and it just depends. They have both genetics, but DNA tests have shown that these are different species, and they do have a different range. Eastern screech owls train the same as a western screech owl, so same rules apply. This is an owl that's good to work with, great for programs, can be trained quite well if raised from a baby, a lot of fun to work with. The next owl is one of my absolute favorites, and probably my favorite to train for falconry. That is the burrowing owl. Burrowing owls live underground. They'll dig their own burrow. You wouldn't think they can, but they do. They will dig underground, and they will take out like the poop of other animals, usually things like a badger, and they'll put that all around the edge as olfactory camouflage, as a way to if other predators like a badger or fox or coyote come sniffing around, that's to try to block their scent. Now, owls cannot smell. Owls have no sense of smell at all, but they're trying to override that smell for other predators. Burrowing owls are mostly diurnal. They're mostly a daytime bird. They're very easy to train. They're very easy to work with. They're very smart. They're pretty fast, and I have hunted with them and had a great old time with them. These are really neat birds, and in any capacity that you can work with a burrowing owl, I cannot recommend them enough. Fabulous birds, incredible birds, wonderful to work with, and I wish people use them more because they are so wonderful. The next owl is the Flamulated owl. The Flamulated owl is tiny. It's tiny, and it kind of looks like a miniature screech owl with little bits of orange flames on it, which gives it the name Flamulated owl. Their closest relative is actually the Puerto Rican owl, which is kind of a weird owl on its own right, but genetically that's who it's closest to. Flamulated owls are odd. They're usually don't see them, and every few years rehabbers get a bunch of them that come in, and then you don't see them for years. So flamulated owls, I've only worked with them in education and rehab capacities, and I think they're amazing life forms, but I don't like working with them because they're too small. They're so small that it's hard to have equipment to fit them, and they're so small that using them it's not impactful to the public. It just looks like you got a little bit of Play-Doh sitting on you. People can't see them. So I don't recommend going out there and trying to acquire one for education. But if you have one that comes in as an ambassador for your species, so be it. But really need birds. But again, not the best for education, and certainly not for falconry. Now the last owl is the elf owl, which is the smallest owl in the world. These you mostly find in the Sonoran deserts, kind of southern New Mexico and Arizona and Mexico itself. And they like to nest in saguaro cacti. They'll find a hollow tree hollowed out by a flicker or a woodpecker, and they'll just nest in there. These things are tiny. Their closest relative is the long-whiskered owlet, which is another kind of strange owl. But these elf owls, I would use one for education only because it's got the notation of being the smallest owl in the world. And that's pretty neat if you're saying, look how little these amazing predators can be. But other than that, they train like any other owl, and they're so little that you have to do a lot to work with them. They'd be much better as a static display bird in like a zoological type setting. But they're still neat, they're beautiful, and they do their thing in their own way. And I think they're absolutely amazing, especially if you're in Arizona going through and you're checking the saguaro cacti and you knock on a big old cactus and whoop, a little head pops out. That's the best thing on earth, seeing a little elf owl come and say hello to you. So, hope you enjoyed this video. It's long, covered a lot of things. I hope you learned some new things. I hope you got some new information. Let me know your thoughts, your comments. Owls are weird, so share your experiences in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your views. And again, if you have questions, we're putting a video together with it'll just be Q&A. So send an email to benwoodruffalconry@gmail.com, and we're going to compile those and do some videos just doing Q&A of those. But until next time, hope you enjoyed this video. Please hit subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, happy hawking.